Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 28 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to walk right through this fascinating text, literally verse by verse. We'll be looking strictly at the plain meaning, the pashhat, of these events as they unfold. It's a really incredible chapter, so let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We've got 6 parts to get through. First, the departure from home, then the stairway to heaven, followed by the awakening at Bethel. After that, we'll look at Jacob's conditional vow, pull out some practical lessons, and finally, do a quick chapter recap. Simple enough, right?
All right, Section 1, the departure from home. This covers verses 1 through 9.
To give you just a little bit of context before we jump into verse 1, we are stepping into the story right after Jacob receives the primary blessing from his father Isaac. So, at the top of the chapter, verse 1, Isaac calls for Jacob, blesses him again, and gives him a crystal clear, totally non-negotiable command. He says, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman." Isaac is intentionally, and I mean firmly, sending his son away from the local Canaanite population. In verse 2, he tells him exactly where to go, Padan Aram. Now, Padan Aram is up in northwest Mesopotamia. It's the ancestral home of Jacob's mother, Rebekah. Isaac tells Jacob to go straight to the house of his grandfather Bethuel and find a wife among his uncle Laban's daughters. Why this specific spot? Well, it's absolutely crucial. Isaac wants to make sure Jacob marries within their own extended family. This keeps the Abrahamic line completely intact and separate from the surrounding culture. Then, in verses 3 and 4, Isaac drops this massive, overarching blessing of Abraham onto Jacob. He prays that God Almighty will make him fruitful, multiply his descendants into a whole assembly of peoples, and eventually give him the very land he's living in as an alien. With that huge blessing and clear instructions, verse 5 tells us Isaac officially sends Jacob on his way.
And this perfectly sets up a brilliant contrast in verses 6 through 9 between Jacob and his older brother Esau. The text tells us Esau is watching all of this go down. He sees Isaac bless Jacob and send him far away to find a wife. He hears that strict rule, no Canaanite women. Plus, he sees Jacob actually obey his parents, pack up and leave. Suddenly, boom, a light bulb goes off for Esau. Verse 8 says, Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. Remember, Esau had already married local Hittite women, and it broke his parents' hearts. So what's his solution? Verse 9 says he goes over to the family of Ishmael, Abraham's other son, and marries Mahalath, Ishmael's daughter, adding her to his other wives. The profound irony here is almost painful. Esau is trying to course correct, right? But he tries to fix this deep, spiritual, covenantal problem with a geographical band-aid. He marries just a bit closer to the family tree to appease his dad, completely missing the whole point of the specific chosen lineage God established through Isaac.
Moving right along, section 2, the stairway to heaven. We're looking at verses 10 through 15 now.
At this point, we leave the whole family drama in the rearview mirror, and the camera zooms in entirely on Jacob. Let's look at the physical reality of his journey in verses 10 and 11. Verse 10 says Jacob left Beersheba and headed toward Haran. He's traveling totally alone. Verse 11 simply tells us he reached a certain place and stopped for the night because the sun went down. Listen, he doesn't have a tent, he doesn't have a sleeping bag, he is so utterly exposed and vulnerable out there in the wilderness that he literally grabs a raw stone off the ground, shoves it under his head as a pillow, and goes to sleep. I mean, try to put yourself in his shoes. Imagine how isolated, exhausted, and deeply frightened he must have felt. Pitch dark, sleeping in the dirt, a literal rock for a pillow, running from a furious brother, and staring down a completely unknown future.
But right here, in this exact moment of sheer physical destitution, something absolutely incredible happens. Verse 12 gives us one of the most famous visions in the entire text. It says, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Now, looking strictly at the pashhat, the plain meaning, we really need to clarify the original Hebrew word used here. The word is sulam. People almost always translate it as a ladder, but in the ancient Near Eastern context, a sulam is actually more like a massive terraced stairway or ziggurat. It's a towering structure, and it represents this direct, active connection between the physical, dusty earth Jacob is sleeping on and the divine realm of heaven. The angels, God's messengers, are actively moving on it, ascending and descending, constantly bridging the gap between those two realms.
So, the most crucial point is what happens next. In verses 13 through 15, God himself stands above this massive stairway and speaks directly to Jacob. He introduces himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac, and you have to notice the staggering contrast here. Jacob has absolutely zero right now. He's literally sleeping on a rock. Yet God offers him absolutely everything. And he does it through these incredibly specific, unconditional promises. First, God promises him the very land he is sleeping on, for him and his descendants. Second, he promises descendants so numerous they'll be like the dust of the earth, spreading west, east, north, and south. Third, that all the peoples on earth will be blessed through Jacob and his offspring. Fourth, and honestly, this had to be the most comforting thing for a lonely traveler to hear, God promises continuous personal protection. He says, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. And finally, a safe return. God guarantees he will bring Jacob back to this land and will not leave him until every single one of these sweeping promises is fulfilled.
Okay, let's jump to section 3, the awakening at Bethel. This is verses 16 through 19. Let's see how this narrative builds. In verse 16, Jacob wakes up, and his immediate reaction to this mind-blowing divine encounter is this profound realization. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Verse 17 tells us he was afraid. Now, hold on, let's clarify the Hebrew concept here, because the word used for fear is yirah. This isn't your standard runaway in terror kind of panic. Yirah is more like a deep, vibrating sense of absolute awe and reverence when you are faced with ultimate reality. Overwhelmed by this awe, Jacob declares, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. He suddenly realizes that this ordinary, seemingly random, dusty spot in the middle of nowhere, where he literally just collapsed from exhaustion, was actually a sacred intersection of heaven and earth. Because of that profound spiritual realization, Jacob takes some immediate physical action in verses 18 and 19. Early the next morning, he takes that exact same stone he used as a pillar, stands it upright to make a pillar, and pours oil on top of it. This isn't just random, it's deeply significant. He's creating what's called a matzavah, a sacred memorial pillar. In the ancient world, pouring oil was a way to consecrate something, setting it apart as permanently holy to mark the exact spot where the divine actually intersected with human history. Then, he goes ahead and officially changes the name of the place. It used to be a Canaanite city called Luz, but Jacob names it Bethel, which in Hebrew literally means house of God. So he completely redefines his physical environment based purely on this intense spiritual experience.
Next up is section 4, Jacob's conditional vow. We are in verses 20 through 22.
This brings us to the final verses of the chapter. Jacob responds to God's massive promises by making a very, very structured vow. Interestingly, he lists his physical, immediate needs as clear conditions. Just listen to the structure here. He says, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear. Step 3, so that I return safely to my father's house. Notice how wonderfully grounded this is. Jacob isn't out here asking for immense riches or a giant kingdom. He's asking for basic human survival, protection, food, clothes, and a safe trip home. He says that if God does these things, then, step 4, the Lord will be my God. And then, step 5, this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. It's a definitive spiritual commitment for sure, but it is deeply linked to God actively proving his physical provision during this incredibly perilous journey.
And Jacob caps off this vow at the very end of verse 22 with a highly specific financial pledge. He tells God, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth, a strict 10%. In Hebrew, this concept is known as the ma'aser, or the tithe. Basically, Jacob promises that if God protects and prospers him through this crazy journey, he will acknowledge that ultimate provision by structurally returning a tenth of absolutely everything back to God.
All right, section 5, practical lessons to learn. Now that we've walked through the text verse by verse, let's take a step back. We've looked clearly at the plain meaning of what actually happened to Jacob. But what practical life lessons can you and I take away from this today? Well, first off, it teaches us a ton about recognizing the divine in highly unexpected places. Think about it. Jacob found the gate of heaven while sleeping in the dirt on a rock. Often it's in our modern moments of greatest isolation, exhaustion, or uncertainty that we're actually perfectly positioned for a real spiritual awakening. Second, it highlights the real importance of making structured commitments. Jacob's vow wasn't just some vague, warm, fuzzy feeling of gratitude. It was specific and actionable. Third, it teaches us about trusting in promises during times of extreme uncertainty. God gave Jacob these massive promises about the future precisely when Jacob was fleeing his past and literally had nothing in his hands. And finally, there's the principle of the maaser, giving back. Jacob's pledge of 10% is a great reminder that recognizing our blessings should naturally lead to a disciplined, structured practice of gratitude and generosity in our daily lives.
And that brings us to Section 6, Chapter Recap. We've covered a lot of ground today, guys, so let's do a quick, energetic recap of everything we just learned. This will help validate the who, what, where, and why, and really lock it into memory. So, we started by seeing Jacob sent away to Paddan Aram by Isaac to find a wife from his family and completely avoid the Canaanites. Then, we saw Esau react by trying to appease his father, entirely missing the point, and marrying Ishmael's daughter instead. After that, we followed Jacob alone into the wilderness, where he used a stone for a pillow and had that incredible dream of the Sulam, the massive stairway connecting earth to heaven. We heard God's unconditional promises of land, innumerable descendants, and absolute personal protection. We watched Jacob wake up in trembling awe, set up his stone pillow as a sacred pillar, and rename the city Bethel, the house of God. And finally, we saw Jacob make a deeply personal, structured vow to make the Lord his God and return a tenth of all of his blessings if he made it home safely.
I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on today. Where's the Bethel in your own life that you simply haven't recognized yet? Where's that ordinary, perhaps really difficult place that might actually be the gate of heaven for you? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.